Hi, Dreamland listeners. This is Marla Fries. My guest today is Tom Campbell. He has excelled as a scientist, a nuclear physicist, and for the last 20 years has been at the heart of developing the U.S. missile defense systems. In the early 70s, he and a few others were instrumental in getting Robert Monroe of the Monroe Institute's laboratory up and running as they developed the technologies for creating drug-free altered states. Tom has been exploring the subjective and objective mind ever since, and for the last 30 years, he's been dedicated to explore and teach the properties, boundaries, and abilities of consciousness. His book, My Big Toe, The Theory of Basically Everything, is a trilogy that we will discuss today, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you Tom Campbell.
Well, Marla, thank you for the very nice introduction. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, Tom, I have had the pleasure of sitting and listening to you at one of your wonderful seminars, which we'll talk about in a little while, but this trilogy, My Big Toe, is just stunning, and I would love to let our listeners in on what your main theory is and the message of your book.
Okay, that's like let's talk about the nature of the universe in 25 words or less. But let me give you a little thumbnail sketch of what it's about and what the major conclusions are. Of course, Toe is theory of everything, and these books, there's 3 books, not just one, it's a trilogy, and they start from basic principles with just 2 assumptions, and that's that consciousness exists and evolution exists, and from there logically builds a theory of everything, and that everything includes physics. It does some very good physics. It explains why quantum mechanics is as it is, in other words, that particles are probability distributions, and it explains why relativity exists because of c, the velocity of light, being constant. So it does some good physics that physicists haven't been able to do. And it also derives metaphysics, because with an understanding of the larger reality comes an understanding of consciousness, an understanding of the nature of this reality we're in, what its purpose is, what your purpose is. And out of that comes love and caring and that sort of thing, and metaphysics falls out. So it's a theory that kind of covers everything, including the objective and the subjective. The fundamental tenet of it is that reality is information. So that's the fundamental thing, and that information in its simplest form, of course, is digital. So we look at consciousness. Well, that was great. That was about 50 words or less. But the way that you talk about it in your book is, I mean, I'm so right-brained. I can understand your book. The way that you share your information and your experience, which is basically you speak from this interdimensional reality going in and out of consciousness and giving us another framework of how to create more consciousness for ourselves. And one of the things that was really fundamental for me in sitting and listening to you and being a part of your seminar was entropy. And I'd love for you to discuss that with our listeners. Okay, entropy is a physics term, but it also is a philosophy term as well, in that the physics actually drives quite a bit of philosophy. The physics term, entropy, is a measure of disorder. That's one way of looking at it. It's a measure of disorder. So randomness would be high entropy, and things that are very ordered and put together in very special ways. In other words, relationships between the parts are well defined. Things that are ordered are low entropy. And also, of course, things that are put together well and well ordered in their relationship also have the ability to do something. For instance, take a car. You have probably a couple of thousand parts if you count every nut, bolt, washer, and wire, and all those thousands of parts have to relate to each other in a very special way. Well, that is low entropy. It's ordered. You take all those car parts and make them all separate parts and throw them in a pile someplace randomly, and that's high entropy. And you can see that the low entropy thing has power, can do things. It's a car. The high entropy is just a pile of parts and can't really do anything that's useful. So another way of stating entropy, besides it's a measure of disorder, is that it's also a measure of the ability of the system to do work, to accomplish something, to have power, to change things. So both of those two go together. Another example for your listeners: take a take a bottle of gasoline. If you have that gasoline very highly ordered in a liquid, which all the molecules are very packed tight together, then it's something that can cause change, right? It can start big fires. It can let a car drive, for a while.
Right.
But if you let all that gasoline evaporate, then its molecules are now all randomly placed around in the atmosphere. They're all spread out, and it can't do anything. It's lost its ability to have power. So you see that randomness comes with less power, and order comes with more power. So that's the basic concept of entropy, and that, as applied to information, you see, becomes the driving purpose, if you will, for consciousness. Systems evolve by lowering their entropy, by becoming more ordered and more capable, and then lowering entropy becomes the driver of evolution, and we find out that a low entropy consciousness is love. So that's the connection in the metaphysics.
That's really extraordinary. The lower the entropy and the more organized even the thought processes are, the more love is accessed, the more consciousness is accessed. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. And the more that you become love, the more power you have, the more things you can do, the bigger the reality you live in, the more things you can do with your consciousness, and the more capable you are as far as interacting and modifying things in this world. And my examples are, look at Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, and Gandhi. These were all people who had big hearts and thought big thoughts and saw the big picture. They had a lot of love toward everyone. It wasn't just their own little special interest group, but they saw big pictures. And look at the things they did. They totally reformed their societies. That's the power of love. And
I think that, at least for our listeners, because people who tune into Dreamland are interested in elevating their consciousness, this is a really, really key point. And when you were first developing these processes, you had started in the technology of the hemisync work with Bob Monroe, and you were able to enter different consciousness states because of the brainwave frequencies. Can you explain some of that?
Well, yes, I started with Bob Monroe back before there was any hemisync or any binaural beat or anything like that at all. As a matter of fact, myself and Dennis Minerick, who worked with Bob, and this is like 1972, in the early days, we invented that concept of the binaural beat driving brainwaves, and it later proved to be very successful, and Bob patented it and gave it the name hemisync. So that was at the very beginning of things. And yes, we started just by listening to sounds. There was no hemisync. We were probably a year and a half to 2 years into the process of learning, Bob teaching us to go out of body, before the binaural beats and the hemisync-like thing ever got invented. So it's not necessary, but what it does is that it puts you into a good theta state, a good meditation state, without you having to practice and learn, how to meditate. So that's kind of what the technology does. And people, your listeners, can go to Google, put in the words binaural beat, and you'll get lots of sites that let you make your own binaural beats for free. And if you want to make one that entrains you to a theta state, then you use the binaural beat should be around 4 hertz, or about 4 cycles per second, which means you put in a bass frequency, say, of 5,000, and then a second frequency of 5,004. Or you could put in a bass frequency of 500, and the second frequency would be 504. It's the difference between the two frequencies tells you what the beat will be, and that's what it'll train your brainwaves to. So that's available for free on the internet.
And what Tom happens to people who start to train their brain this way, in your experience, and what can you tell our listeners about that?
Okay, well, what it does is that helps the person get into a good meditation state. Of course, it's not going to force a person to do something against their will. It's not like it's mind control. It's just that it encourages you to drop into a good meditation state, and that's what a theta state is. That's about a 4 hertz per second spike in your EEG reading, which reads your brain waves. It's electromagnetic waves generated by the brain. Anyway, so you get into that state, and once you're in that state, then you can communicate with the larger consciousness system. You can go into various databases that are there. You can do things like remote viewing and healing, and a lot of the paranormal kinds of things are available to you while you're in a good, solid theta state. So it's a good place to learn. But I always caution people that using tools like binaural beats are like using training wheels. You have to also know when it's time to take the training wheels off. Otherwise, you'll be trapped in that state and never be able to go beyond it.
Right. Well, in reference to that, you talk about merging with other energies. That's communicating with those who passed on, and what else in those states?
Well, you are consciousness, so you're able to do whatever consciousness can do. You can modify the probabilities of what's going to happen in this reality. You can remote view and go places. You can use that energy to...
And there's also, I remember you saying something about assisting people in the afterlife. You're able to do so much with the consciousness in that. Could you explain a little bit of that?
Yes. Well, the way the reincarnation works is that when a person dies, they just switch reality frames. Okay, their consciousness doesn't die; just the body goes away. This reality by the way, is a virtual reality. It's just information. So in the virtual reality, your character goes away, but you as consciousness continue. And the point of your existence is to lower your entropy, become love, and you do that in this reality frame through your experience and interaction with other people. So with that as a setup, when you die then and your consciousness switches to a different reality frame, there are beings there that will help you kind of get over the experience of the virtual reality you were just in, kind of let that go, and go on to plan your next experience in that virtual reality, because it takes many such cycles or reincarnational cycles to these opportunities to learn and grow before we actually do a lot of learning and growing. It's a very slow process. So there are beings there that help facilitate this transition from one virtual reality to the next virtual reality experience, or from one incarnation to another. And sometimes, depending if the individuals are very obsessed with something, then it's a little difficult. They get trapped in that obsession. It's hard for them to let go. And that's when they need a little help. And sometimes somebody from their own reality frame is a little better able to understand their issues. And you can actually go and help these people make that transition. You become part of the team. And I indeed worked in that capacity. Excuse me, I got it. It's springtime here, and the pollen is thick and everywhere, so I've got this cough.
Yes, I hear it. Well, let's take a little bit of a break, and let's talk more a little about this actual subject when we get back.
You're listening to Whitley Strieber's Dreamland with expert host Marla Fries.
We're back with Tom Campbell. And Tom, it's so exciting to hear a scientist explain the process that you have gone through that really does define what a lot of us are interested in as far as metaphysics are concerned. The things that, people think that we're crazy about as far as talking to energies, entities, experiencing dead people, and you, having been a scientist, you actually explain this in a very fundamental principle way of having these experiences yourself. So you were just saying about going in there and assisting people. Can you give us some more of your experiences in that realm?
Oh, sure. If you like any place else, if you hang around enough, somebody will give you a job. So if you're capable of helping, sometimes and I have worked in this capacity for some time, where there are sometimes difficult cases that the people doing the transitions have, and I will be a part of that transition team, to where I try to work with the person to help them get over the attachment they have to this particular reality frame, help them get out of the beliefs that they're stuck in, so that then they can go on. They can become aware of themselves as consciousness and start to plan the next incarnation and that sort of thing. So you can easily, there's enough work there to be done that you can become part of these transition teams and actually help people who are having difficulty making the transition to do it more easily. I can remember one in particular that kind of sticks in my mind. There was a person took his family out in a boat, a very small boat, out into the ocean, just a day trip. And I can imagine his wife and his 2 children. And a storm came up, and the boat got capsized, and they all drowned. But this person, this guy, who had evidently told everybody, "Oh, it's okay, no problem, we can go out." He was so wound up about the accident occurring and his responsibility for it that he was obsessed with it. And there he was in his mind, long after the accident happened and everybody drowned, he was still clinging to a piece of driftwood, a piece of flotsam, looking for his wife and his children, trying to find them. So the time just kind of stood still for him. He was just in that situation, and the storm was raging, and he was clinging to this flotsam, and he was hollering for his wife and his children, and he was just stuck there because he couldn't go on. And it probably had a lot to do with his guilt and the amount of energy and the responsibility he felt for putting them into that situation where they all got killed. So basically, you had to get through to him. It was a challenge, because if you just came in and talked to him, he was so obsessed with it that he couldn't let go of it. He couldn't, he wouldn't process what you were telling him. He'd just block that out. So the idea I came up with is to get in a boat, join his thoughts, get into his head that way.
Right.
Came in with the boat, and I was part of his experience, and there I was in the storm with him, you see, with rain gear on and that kind of stuff, and we came up to him, and of course he was hollering about his wife and children, and we said, "They're okay, they're fine, we got them. Now let's get you up and out, and they'll be fine. We'll reunite you just shortly here. Climb in the boat," that sort of thing. Wow. And knowing that his wife and children were okay, he let it go. He relaxed, and he got into the boat, and of course, after that it was easy. Everything was trivial. So that was the key, though, was you had to approach him from inside his own obsession. You had to get and do that. So those are the kinds of things that you can do when you're working this process of helping the transitions. And often you see it's easier for somebody who's been here, who's part of this reality frame, to kind of understand the nature of the obsession and find a way to get into it and be useful. So that's kind of in a nutshell.
Well, and I really loved your take on the idea of reincarnation, that we recycle. I remember you saying in the seminar, basically, well, if you're here and you're here to do something and you just don't get it, you have the opportunity to come back and do it again. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that too.
Okay. Well, that derives from the purpose of why we're here. What we're here to do is to learn, to grow, to become love. And you can say that in terms of we're here to evolve, our consciousness, to evolve the quality of our consciousness, and that's equivalent to saying we're here to reduce the entropy of our consciousness, which is equivalent to saying we're here to grow spiritually, which is equivalent to saying we're here to become love. So all those things are basically, the same sort of thing. Now, that being our purpose, it's hard to do that, become love, in a few years or even a few lifetimes. It's a very difficult thing to do. It's a very slow, interactive process of growing up. Evolution is not a fast thing. So you have to, you recycle through these opportunities to learn and grow, and that's what we're doing here. And there's no free lunch. It's not like school here in the U.S. where if you're old enough, you get passed on to the next grade. That's not it, and it doesn't. And you don't get any, real credit for trying. It's a matter of you have to grow up. If you don't learn that lesson,
wait a minute. No credit for trying? There's no credit for trying, Tom?
No, you don't get any. I shouldn't say no credit for trying. Let's say that you get no progress. You get no evolution just for trying. You actually have to learn. You have to grow. You have to become love. It's not just that you're trying to. Well, I've been through these evolutions on these I call them experience packets or incarnations. So I want to go to the I want to be promoted just because I've been working at it. That's not it. You only go further up. You only grow. You only evolve your consciousness if you actually learn to let go of ego, let go of fear, let go of all those things that are high entropy. So if you don't learn, then you get to come back and try again, and there's no end to that. You keep trying and trying. Let's say you have an anger management problem. So you get to come back and work on that anger management problem. You probably plan an incarnation such that anger management or dealing with anger is a key part of it. That gives you an opportunity to learn and grow there. So until you get that, if you fail again and you still have the anger management problem, you get to come back and try it again. Now, you don't necessarily do the same thing over and over again. You approach it from different angles and different ways and maybe different hardness levels. You may back up and take something that's a little easier next time. So you're constantly working, and the system's working with you to succeed. You just have to keep working at it until you do succeed. So there's no free path.
And I love the experience that the system wants to work with you. You talk about consciousness and there being a database for all of the information for us to access. But you've also explained through your book that there are sometimes the push or the system steps in to assist us. Let's call it God, or let's just frame it in another way for the source or the universe to assist us in our own process. Could you tell us about that, Tom?
Sure. Well, in order to understand that, we have to back out to a little bigger picture, and that is that everything that's real, everything that's functional, everything that's fundamental, let me put it that way, is consciousness. Everything else is virtual. Consciousness, its mission, its purpose is to evolve. It evolves by lowering entropy. We are a part of its strategy to evolve. We're here trying to evolve our little piece of it, and that's how the whole system evolves. So we're part of the process of the whole system evolving. So one would think then it's in the whole system's best interest to help us succeed, because the more we evolve, the more it evolves, because we and it are the same thing. We're all one. We are consciousness. We're just subsets or pieces of the larger consciousness system, and we're at work here in this virtual reality trying to lower our entropy and evolve. So as part of the strategy for the larger consciousness system to evolve, it helps us. It helps us to evolve, and it does that in several ways. You've heard of synchronicity, where things just happen to work out so that you get the opportunities you need to grow, grow. And of course, like you say, You're very right-brained, so you live in synchronicities and things just working out in your daily life.
Yes, I live that way. Yes.
As right-brain people. Actually, people who are balanced, both right and left brain, tend to live that way too. But that's a right brain function. But just the system is very helpful to you as you meditate. The system will maybe tell you things. You can ask advice. You can get information, and the system is ready and willing to help you in any way it can. But you have to be ready for the help. The system is not going to force anything on you. It's just going to set up opportunities, and you still have to grab that opportunity and make something of it, because you have free will. So the system won't bully you, but it certainly will, help you whenever it can. So that's kind of the nature of this reality frame, and that's part of the reason why we can modify this consciousness with our consciousness, because we're consciousness, the system's consciousness, we're all part of the same thing, so we can use our own intent to modify what happens in the future. That's how people heal their minds. That's how people have precognitive dreams and get into these spaces where they can see the probable future. But it's just probable because we have free will.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to discuss intent.
You're listening to Whitley Strieber's Dreamland Online with guest host Marla Fries.
Tom, you said that we can access this through our intent. When we want to get information or we want assistance, it is by the virtue of our intent that is pulled to us. Is that correct? That
is correct. Intent is like the motive force. It's the things that make, that's That's the thing that makes things happen in consciousness, is a conscious intent. And some people would call that will. You will something. You have the intent to do it. Intent if you have consciousness, which is just awareness, it's an information system, the intent is the intent for something to be different, the intent for you to get data. So intent's the motive force. Yes.
Well, and the idea of intent, if it is of a malevolent nature, what do you say about that, Tom?
Well, intent can be malevolent. There are those people who, it's kind of a trite thing, but the voodoo, that sort of thing. The people who, instead of getting rid of your headache, give you a headache, or instead of helping you get healthier, make you sicker. Yes, all that is real, and it's just a system, and the system can be can be abused as well as used. But the system also has some brakes on that kind of behavior. It's very limiting. The high entropy behavior that would use intent for negative purposes is limited, and that's because it is negative. They work out of ego, they work out of control, power, force, and that's self-limiting. Because the ego itself is high entropy, so you kind of get to a point where you can't grow much further, you can't get much stronger. Whereas on the positive side, there's no limitation.
Is the ego with the high entropy just scattered because it doesn't have a soul base, or what is the how does one shift the ego principle and make it heart-centered and soul-centered so that there's a lower entropy to it? What is that process?
Okay, well, it's not one has a soul or one doesn't or something. It's not like that. All are just pieces of consciousness. They're all subsets of this larger consciousness system, and because they have free will, they can evolve more or less. They can make good choices or they can make bad choices. So if they make choices on the negative side to abuse people, to lie, cheat, steal, all the things that we know, or those kinds of things, they try to overrun other person's free wills and impose their own will on them. If they do that, then they can, de-evolve, which in a way you'd say is growing toward the negative. They're de-evolving. They're getting further away from love. And that's unfortunate because then they're just digging a hole for themselves. But intent becomes powerful when it becomes focused. And that's why people meditate, because everybody has intent, right? That's like making a wish. Oh, I have intent that, I'm good looking and wealthy and, somebody will give me a new Porsche. But that's not likely to happen because your intent is not well focused. A focused intent we get from learning to meditate. And when you learn to meditate, you learn to let go of all the noise, the chatter. Some people call it monkey mind, all that busyness, the judging. Basically, that's your ego running wild in your head. And you learn to let all that go, and then you're just pure existence. You're just consciousness. And at that point, your intent is strong. Your intent actually can move things, whereas before, your intent is busy. It's got a lot of entropy, and it's noisy, and it's flittering here and there, and you can't hold your mind on a single thought for more than a few microseconds before it changes. And that intent has very little power. So first, in order to use your intent to modify the probable future, you have to learn to focus that intent, get rid of all the noise, and that's the meditation, and that's what the hemisync or the binaural beats can help you do. But again, you need to learn to do that on your own. You should not be beholden to technology to grow. All that technology is going to do is just kind of help you understand it, help you experience it, which then makes it a little easier for you to learn it on your own. But in any case, yes, intent is the power.
And what's so amazing, your trilogy, and I suggest all of us that are interested in this get your book, My Big Toe, but the idea that you're bringing this forth now at a time where I really believe that, at least in the United States, people are looking more and more and more at the transparency of what is real or what is not real. And what do you want to do with this, Tom? I mean, you've become sort of a YouTube sensation out there. There are many of your lectures that are on YouTube. You just did the keynote address at the Monroe Institute, and you are bringing this forth and lecturing. What do you think about this? Why are you doing this?
Well, it's, I don't have any big grand plan in my mind. What I have done is that after 35 years of experimenting and doing science in the larger reality in order to understand how it works, come up with this model that allows me to explain it to other people so that they can understand it without having a degree in science or anything. Like you say, even right-brain people can read it and get it. So
well, I got
to
tell you, you did make my left brain hurt. Your wonderful wife gave me some ephedrine during the course, but I did come out of this experience totally more present. And during the seminars, you also kept some of us right brain people really on edge with a few of the remote viewing exercises, and gave me at this time more clarity about my own work. And I think that it's just amazing what you do in the time that you do these seminars. So it's been extraordinary to watch this, and any of us who are interested in this can look online, see how you explain all of this, read the book, and there's some other wonderful opportunities. There's your website, of course. What is that for everyone?
That's www.mybigtoe.com.
And you are going to be at the Meta Center in New York, April 30th through May 2nd. You are giving a seminar then, is that correct?
Right, April 30 and then May 1st and May 2nd, that's right.
And
the Meta Center in New York City.
Now, since you're doing this for the book and you're touring around doing lecturing, where's your job with the missile defense systems? Do they miss
well,
you?
Actually,
where are you?
Actually, now I work for NASA, and I have for the last several years, and I work as a consultant because I don't, I have other things going on in my life. So as a consultant, I kind of have a freedom to adjust things the way I want. Now, I still have products to produce, and when I have to produce them, I have to, put my full focus on that. But at the other time, I can schedule things as well. So it's not like having a regular 9 to 5. I can adjust things. But yes, I am a working scientist, and that makes my life very, very busy, trying to do all these things. But you were saying that you did get something out of this. What people get is perspective. It's so much nicer when you can kind of see everything fall into place with one kind of overarching understanding, and it all makes sense. And then once it makes sense, it kind of touches the ground under your feet, if you will, instead of kind of flying around and knowing that, yes, I can do this and yes, I can do this, but suddenly you know why you can do it and what's going on there and how it works. And that's just very, very supportive, I think, and grounding for most people, that they can actually understand what's going on.
And to also know that they... I'm sorry, go ahead.
And that was my point you asked me earlier, why am I doing all this, or where am I taking it? And basically, the big challenge wasn't to understand it. Well, it was a challenge. That took me 35 years or so. But after I understood it, the big challenge was to put it in a form that people could understand. This stuff is very, very outside of most people's normal paradigms of thinking and the way reality is. So to put it in terms that were understandable to the average person was a very big challenge. And I just wanted to get it out there so that people could read it and get something out of it. It's like news you can use. It's something that is it's just there for people to use, and that was really my sole point in it, is to help people understand, because you can't force anybody to learn anything. Learning doesn't take place at the intellect. It's not that you need to intellectually learn these things. It's that you need to be. The change has to be at the being level, and it
that
just
was
helps
really,
people
really
understand that.
And that was very, very clear, Tom, because you basically are telling us you must have this experience yourself. you can read about it and you can intellectualize it, but in order to really understand, you must have the experience.
Absolutely. The intellectualization of it, and you can read my books and intellectually understand logically what they're saying because they are laid out very logically. But if you don't experience it, then that really doesn't help you grow much. The real, where the rubber meets the road is where you get out there and you make every choice count. You do things for the right reasons. You do things out of love and caring and compassion. That's the real crux of it. Just intellectual understanding by itself it's nice because it helps you understand, but it doesn't help you grow. You have to do that yourself. Nobody can make you grow up. That has to be an internal thing that you do on your own. And I put the books out there because I think understanding how it works and why it works and what your purpose is and how the healing and how these paranormal things, which aren't paranormal at all, they're just very normal once you understand how reality works, that all these things kind of helps a person get perspective, which then allows them and gives them some incentive to change themselves, to grow up.
Well, and it also does challenge the dogma of the religious organization around God or a consciousness. It takes the onus off of man controlling it for us because we have access to it. It's as though we are part of this consciousness, therefore we are part of God.
Exactly. It's all one. We're all netted. We're all connected with each other. We're all part of consciousness. And once you feel that, once you understand that at an inside, intuitive being level, then your whole life and your existence and your world just changes. That's a big kind of paradigm shift to get to, but that's where people need to go.
Well, let's take a little bit of a break.
You're listening to Whitley Strieber's Dreamland with expert host Marla Fries.
Tom, in the time that we have left today, what would you like to tell our listeners? What do you want to share with us today? I haven't driven this too hard. My little right brain thinking, likes to put things in a way for some of our listeners to hear a lot of the information that you have given us. But what do you want to share with our listeners?
Well, what I would share would be that you can do this, you can grow up, you can make a difference in the quality of your consciousness just by coming to the conclusion that you want to do it. Okay, that's the first thing. You have to understand it well enough to know that this is something you want to do. You do want to grow up. And then you need to realize that it doesn't take anything special. It's not about new things you have to learn. It's about new ways of being. And it's not about doing paranormal things. It's, I kind of came out of the out-of-body area because I worked with Bob Monroe. But
right.
People ask me, well, is that necessary? Do you have to be able to get out of your body and remote view and do all these things in order to grow spiritually? And of course not. It's not important at all to that. Those things just come to you when you grow up. You don't want to get that horse in front of the cart. First, you want to just work on yourself. Make every choice that you make a choice out of caring for others, not about you, but about others. Get rid of the ego, get rid of the fear.
Wow.
And
that's huge. That is so huge, just to even think about that for an entire day. Just the thought of thinking that way all day long, I can't imagine how that could change our perspective and our reality.
And that's the core of it, because you see, love is a vector pointing out from you out to others. It's about others. It's not about you. And ego and fear are all about you. It's all about what you want, what you need, what you're afraid of. So the whole key to growing up is to change your perspective to it being about others, not about you. And that will help you get rid of the fear and the ego. And that'll put you on a path of progress. And just doing that every day in the way you interact with your spouse, with your children, with your coworkers, with the mailman, just everything. If it's about them, if you're thinking about, how are they feeling? What are they thinking? What are their needs? And you're trying to be helpful and useful to those people, then that puts you on a path of kind of maximum growth. And that's where I tell your listeners, no, you don't have to do out of body. You don't have to do paranormal things. You don't have to have special skills. You don't have to spend 20 years learning to meditate. Just start with everyday interactions with the people, the animals, the dogs and cats, everything you interact with, the environment, and do it out of love. Do it because of not yourself, but of how you can help. How can you contribute? How can you make things better? And if you do that, then all the rest of it will just kind of come along by itself. You don't have to pursue it. It'll all just work out on its own. So see, it's really very easy. It's not a hard thing to do. It just takes a little effort.
Well, Tom, we also are so influenced by virtue of our media, whether it's the television or the internet, and people are easily seduced by being distracted by information. They turn the TV, what would you say to us? How to monitor this? How do we access information on a day-to-day basis without, taking in everything that they're saying? Because we are inundated with aspects of fear.
Yes, we are. We live in a very fearful society, and we are encouraged, in order to be good little consumers, that go out there and spend. Our fears are encouraged. We see. That's why the advertising, plays on our fears. Here's the guy, and he's not doing very well, and the girls don't like him, and he brings the right brand of beer, and suddenly he's the hit of the birdie. So they play on our fears, and yes, we have to learn to outgrow that. But you do that when it's not about you see, anymore. If you stop thinking about, me not being the life of the party, and that's the problem, it's the way people think about me. It's all about you. Once you get rid of that, then these fear mongering that you get and the other kinds of things in your society that are very negative, all of our news is very negative about all the awful things that happen. And if they would report, oh, here's somebody that's having a wonderful day, well, everybody would turn that off because it's not interesting. Here's somebody that's having the worst day of their life, and everybody will lean up closer to the TV to watch that because that's interesting. If you make it about other people, then those things won't affect you negatively. They just kind of wash on by you because you're not going to tap into them. You're not going to attach your ego to that negative stuff that's going on. So it's basically the same sort of thing. We can't get out of this culture. That's not the answer. To run away from it, go find a little, rock on the top of a mountain someplace and meditate for the rest of your life. That's not the right answer either. You're in this environment in order to be challenged and learn and grow. So we won't stop the environment. We're responsible for dealing with this environment and turning it into growth rather than turning it into more fear and more attachment.
And we have access to this database that, as you have said, houses every thought, everything that has ever happened. Is that correct?
That's right. That the Hindus call that the Akashic Records, but actually, what it is in this, in my model of a consciousness that's just a digital information system, there are databases, and there are databases of what is likely to happen next. I call that the probable future database of all the things that could possibly happen and what the probabilities of each of them actually happening. That's that database. And then you have the historical database, which is everything that has happened. And in that historical database is, yes, every thought, every feeling, everything you've done or wished you could have done, everything there about you is in that database. Everything that happens. And everything that you think about and feel.
Dreamland and unknowncountry.com is tapped into the conversation, of course, of UFO and extraterrestrial. You have been, in your experience of out-of-body consciousness, communing with other energies and other entities. And those of us who are interested in this subject, what is the interfacing between ourselves and those other energies? Can you talk a little bit about some of your experience with that?
Well, yeah, all entities are just consciousness, just like we are, and all of what we think of as being physical is just virtual. Okay, we're in this multiplayer virtual reality game. So these other beings, other people, whether they're people who are just in the larger reality, they don't have, they're not physical to us. Okay, if they're not in our universe, then they're not physical to us. They're non-physical. So that's like Uncle Harry, who died last week. He hasn't reincarnated. He's in what's non-physical to us. So that would be a non-physical reality frame. He's in that transition frame. And you dream. That's another reality frame, the frame that you dream in. And you're working there on lowering your entropy just like you do here. Just another reality frame. And there are these various reality frames, and they're full of beings. They're full of, it's like any evolution. If there's a niche or a place that something can take hold and prosper, then it does. So the larger reality is just full of all sorts of things, all sorts of beings, and you can interact with these beings. Now, some of these beings may share your universe, and that's fine too, because they can come in and out of that, just like I can go to another reality frame and share their universe. I can get into their experience and into their universe, and then I guess that makes me an alien there, you see.
Wow.
So consciousness can move around and can experience. It's just a matter of hooking your intent and your piece of consciousness into the data stream that defines that particular reality frame. So most of what, and I do not know a whole lot about the EET phenomena, but I think an awful lot of it is just the consciousness to consciousness level, because that's really what we are, is consciousness. So I don't tend to look at it as a physical to physical thing, because that's just the game we're in. It's more of a consciousness to consciousness thing, and that's what's going on. And there's all sorts of consciousness life out there. There's hundreds of these reality frames. It's not like we're at the center of all existence. We're not. We're just another reality frame. So there's lots of other frames, and there's lots of other beings, and we're all netted. We're all connected to each other. We're all integrated. All of us are here for basically the same reason, and that's to interact with each other, and that interaction gives us opportunity to grow up, helps us see bigger pictures. So that kind of just ties the whole thing, including what you would call, alien or non-physical beings or whatever. It all ties it into one big thing. We're all consciousness trying to grow up through our interactions with each other.
Well, Tom, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time with us today. Your seminars, your website, there's just a plethora of information there. And I'm sure that our listeners will find your YouTube downloads, and those of us who are in the areas where you're doing the seminars, we have a great opportunity to sit with you over a weekend and really immerse ourselves in this teaching. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity that Donna and Keith and Garrett presented for me to come in and participate with all of you. Thank you so very much for your time, and my goodness, it's so wonderful that you're out there with this book, My Big Toe. Thank you, Tom.
Well, thank you. Yes, but let me give you a little thumbnail sketch of what it's about and what the major conclusions are. Of course, Toe is Theory of Everything, and these books, there's 3 books, not just one. It's a trilogy. And they start from basic principles with just 2 assumptions, and that's that consciousness exists and evolution exists. And from there, logically builds a theory of everything, and that everything includes physics. It does some very good physics. It explains why quantum mechanics is as it is. In other words, that particles are probability distributions, and it explains why relativity exists because of c, the velocity of light, being constant. So it does some good physics that physicists haven't been able to do. And it also derives metaphysics, because with an understanding of the larger reality comes an understanding of consciousness, an understanding of the nature of this reality we're in, what its purpose is, what your purpose is. And out of that comes love and caring and that sort of thing, and metaphysics falls out. So it's a theory that kind of covers everything, including the objective and the subjective. The fundamental tenet of it is that reality is information. So that's the fundamental thing, and that in power and order comes with more power. So that's the basic concept of entropy, and that, as applied to information, you see, becomes the driving purpose, if you will, for consciousness. Systems evolve by lowering their entropy, by becoming more ordered and more capable, and then lowering entropy becomes the driver of evolution, and we find out that a low entropy consciousness is love. So that's the connection in the metaphysics.
That's really extraordinary. The lower the entropy and the more organized even the thought processes are, the more love is accessed, the more consciousness is accessed. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. And the more that you become love, the more power you have, the more things you can do, the bigger the reality you live in, the more things you can do with your consciousness, and the more the more capable you are as far as interacting and modifying things in this world. And my examples are, look at Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, and Gandhi. These were all people who had big hearts and thought big thoughts and saw the big picture. They had a lot of love toward everyone. It wasn't just their own little special interest group, but they saw big pictures. And look at the things they did. They totally reformed their societies. That's the power of...
Hi, Dreamland listeners. This is Marla Fries. My guest today is Tom Campbell. He has excelled as a scientist, a nuclear physicist, and for the last 20 years has been at the heart of developing the U.S. missile defense systems. In the early 70s, he and a few others were instrumental in getting Robert Monroe of the Monroe Institute's laboratory up and running as they developed the technologies for creating drug-free altered states. Tom has been exploring the subjective and objective mind ever since, and for the last 30 years, he's been dedicated to explore and teach the properties, boundaries, and abilities of consciousness. His book, My Big Toe, The Theory of Basically Everything, is a trilogy that we will discuss today, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you Tom Campbell.
Well, Marla, thank you for the very nice introduction. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, Tom, I have had the pleasure of sitting and listening to you at one of your wonderful seminars, which we'll talk about in a little while. But this trilogy, My Big Toe, is just stunning, and I would love to let our listeners in on what your main theory is and the message of your book.
Okay, that's like let's talk about the nature of the universe in 25 words or less, the ability to do something. For instance, take a car. You have probably a couple of thousand parts if you count every nut, bolt, washer, and wire, and all those thousands of parts have to relate to each other in a very special way. Well, that is low entropy. It's ordered. You take all those car parts and make them all separate parts and throw them in a pile someplace randomly, and that's high entropy. And you can see that the low entropy thing has power, can do things. It's a car. The high entropy is just a pile of parts and can't really do anything that's useful. So another way of stating entropy, besides it's a measure of disorder, is that it's also a measure of the ability of the system to do work, to accomplish something, to have power, to change things. So both of those two go together. Another example for your listeners, take take a bottle of gasoline. If you have that gasoline very highly ordered in a liquid, which all the molecules are very packed tight together, then it's something that can cause change, right? It can start big fires. It can let a car drive, for a while.
Right.
But if you let all that gasoline evaporate, then its molecules are now all randomly placed around in the atmosphere. They're all spread out, and it can't do anything. It's lost its ability to have power. So you see that randomness comes with less information. In its simplest form, of course, is digital. So we look at consciousness.
Well, that was great. That was about 50 words or less. But the way that you talk about it in your book is, I'm so right-brained. I can understand your book. The way that you share your information and your experience, which is basically you speak from this interdimensional reality going in and out of consciousness and giving us another framework of how to create more consciousness for ourselves. And one of the things that was really fundamental for me in sitting and listening to you and being a part of your seminar was entropy. And I'd love for you to discuss that with our listeners.
Okay, entropy is a physics term, but it also is a philosophy term as well, in that the physics actually drives quite a bit of philosophy. The physics term, entropy, is a measure of disorder. That's one way of looking at it. It's a measure of disorder. So randomness would be high entropy, and things that are very ordered and put together in very special ways. In other words, relationships between the parts are well defined. Things that are ordered are low entropy. And also, of course, things that are put together well and well ordered in their relationship also